welcome to the Ecommerce Alley podcast, where we believe that great brands are built on passionate leadership, smart operations, and of course, powerful marketing. I am your host, Josh Coffee, like the drink, but more caffeinated. And today with me, I have the guest of honor, Luis Camacho. And Luis is the owner of Phantom Agency as well as GetAds.co. He's a rock star. I subscribe to his stuff. I follow his stuff because he is an expert on ads and creative. And so today, that is actually what we're going to be talking about. So Luis, man, good to have you here. I'm happy that we're able to finally chat. I know we've been trying to make this happen for a little while.
Josh, thanks so much for the kind of intro. And I feel like we've been connected for a while now on Facebook and just, you're subscribed to the newsletter. So I saw when that came through. And again, thanks for having me on here. It's a pleasure being on here. And I can't wait to just talk shop and essentially share some, knowledge with everybody in the audience.
Yeah, and I have to be honest. So I am a sucker for good creatives, and I'm an ad junkie, which I've learned most of all of our listeners and people that subscribe to our list and anything everybody wants to know everything about ads. So you and this isn't just trying to toot your horn or anything, but your creative designs, they got my attention on Instagram and Facebook, and it was a few months back I started seeing them. And then finally I was like, okay, I'm going to click the link and I'm going to buy and subscribe to your group, which is with Ad School, and it's amazing. And so over the last few months, as we've gotten the podcast off the ground, everybody wants to know about Facebook ads. And one of the key components is, of course, creatives. And I don't think there's anyone more qualified, and also just the quality of what you bring to the table and skill set. There's no more qualified, I think, than to talk about this than with you. But I'm curious, you've been doing this, you've owned your agency for a while. Kind of bring me back, what's the origin story? What got you started down this path? Before we dive in and start talking about creatives and what's a good element of that, what kind of brought you to the point of realizing that this is your path?
My calling.
Your calling.
So it's honestly, it's a bit of a long story, but I'll try to go in a brief manner here. So right out of college or right out of high school, I was really into fitness and all that stuff before it was super huge like it is now, right? So I started working out, and then I started recording videos for a fitness YouTube channel that I had back in the day. And eventually I really fell in love with the analytics side of things, right? I feel like I'm a very creative person, but I also like numbers. I like to look at graphs and all those sort of things. So
me too.
I didn't really know much about marketing agency back then, right? And then I started a clothing line that was supposed to kind of go together with the YouTube channel. And then I started focusing more on the actual clothing line, and I built that up. But I really liked the marketing side of things. And this was before I understood much of it, to be honest, because it was right as I was starting to go into college and I went into marketing school. But I was growing that clothing up by myself. I didn't know how to outsource or anything or I knew how to outsource the actual clothing designs and the printing and all those different things. But aside from that, I was the one behind, all the Instagram posts, the YouTube videos, all those different things. And that was previous. That was before I knew anything about advertising as well. So everything was organic. And it was really cool to see things happen when you post an Instagram picture and then you'd see the sales come in. So it's super great feeling. And you might know it obviously with, I don't know if you own your own brands as well, but with clients, right? When you launch a new campaign, you just start to see all the conversions roll through. So it's just a great feeling. Once I was in college, I remember I had an idea of what a marketing agency was and what they did, but I wasn't entirely sure of what it all entailed. And I remember I was talking to a friend, and she mentioned, getting into marketing agencies is extremely hard because all they care about is experience. They don't really care about school or education. And I was like, okay. And so I kind of took that as a challenge, and I decided to just start applying at agencies. And sure enough, the only thing they cared about was do you have previous agency experience? Have you, ran campaigns before? What have you done? And nobody wanted to take me because I had never been in an agency before. And so that's where I kind of I had already, started my own business. I had an idea of how to do things, how do I get my LLC and stuff like that. So I finally got an interview with an agency here locally in Phoenix, and they really liked me. They didn't care about education, which still held true to what my friend had mentioned. But they really liked that I had started my own company and the initiative and things like that. So I got in, I started writing literally like social media content, which I absolutely hated. It's like writing, content calendars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was doing it for like hotels, for like a hotel holding company. So they owned a bunch of like Holiday Inns, Marriott's and stuff like that. And it was just repetitive, like super boring work. But I knew I wanted to get into the paid side of things because I wanted to spend money for people. So I started, learning the ins and outs of Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube advertising, and all those different things. And eventually, the person that kind of took me under her wing, she ended up leaving the agency. So it was really me just managing everything at that agency. And at the same time, I was building Phantom, kind of underground, and that's where the name comes from, right? So it's Phantom because it's a ghost. Nobody knew about it. So I think that was around 2016, maybe early 2017, and then once I had some clients lined up and everything, I decided to quit and just go on my own. Started the agency, running it. Everything looked really good. And so it was just a full-time thing from there. For the agency itself, right, we never had, and this is kind of transitioning to Get Ads, which is our ad creative service. We never had in-house graphic designers or anything like that. And we purely relied on our clients to supply those ad creatives, right? And right then and there, we realized that there was a huge problem. And the main problem really was like turnaround time. Like you'd ask for some ad creatives and you wouldn't get them until like 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks if you got lucky. And then we were trying freelancers from Upwork or Fiverr, and the quality just wasn't there. And we didn't see the value in going that route. And then we tried other services like the unlimited graphic design services that are out there, right? And the same thing happened. We couldn't get deliverables that were quality. We usually had to give a lot of direction on what we wanted. And there was just a lot of feedback, a lot of revisions, and it just took forever still. And we just didn't find that there was anything that really provided us the quality that we were looking for as far as ad creative specific designs. And so we created Get Ads, which is essentially a service where every single one of the designers and video editors that are part of the team go through a training that is specifically for ads. We really wanted to understand the psychology behind consumer behavior and all those different things so that we can focus purely on ad creative side of things.
So what are your thoughts on Design Pickle? Unbiased thoughts.
I think Design Pickle is great. What's that?
I said, what are your unbiased thoughts on Design Pickle? Because I know a lot of people will also use Design Pickle similarly.
For sure. I think I like it, and we tried them in the past. We also tried Penji. We also tried No Limit Creatives before we launched Get Ads. And our opinion of it, right? And this is not to talk down on anything or anything like that, but we tried them, and the main thing that we realized is that they're great at putting out a lot of different types of creatives, right? They can build landing pages for you. They can build websites. Some of them build applications, animations and stuff like that. But I think there was still missing that piece where it's, the ad creative. Like, I feel like for ad creative to be really efficient, you really have to understand consumer behavior. And that's just something that I didn't really see there. And coming up with creatives it's much more different than say, okay, let's build a landing page, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we try to differentiate ourselves, is like we study ads day in and day out and see, okay, like what's performing, what are the top brands really putting out, what's been running forever, which means if they've been running that ad forever, right, it's got to be doing something good for them. So that's kind of like the differentiator. And the other thing is time savings, right? We have one process for every single thing that we put out. So everything is super streamlined, whereas they have things for, social posts or websites or landing pages. So I feel like they're just a little bit more spread out, and they try to hire more so on the side of, okay, let's hire a bunch of people that are decent at everything, where we just say, you have to be really good at ad creatives and that's it.
Yeah. Well, and another thing I'll probably add, so just for everybody listening, like Lewis has Get Ads, and within that, getads.co, it's .co, right? Getads.co?
Yeah.
So you also have Ad School, which everybody needs to go subscribe to. I mean, how much is Ad School per month to get access to all these creatives that you guys do research on?
It's $4.99 a
For
month.
every single person listening to this, you need to go to getodds.co and you need to go to alleypodcast.com/Lewis, and we'll have that forward. I subscribe to this, and this is really important too. I think what's so great is that I was curious your thoughts on Design Pickle before I give you my thoughts. And other, I don't want to trash companies; they do great work, but we work in the e-commerce, and we work with so many. I mean, we have hundreds and thousands of e-commerce people on our list, and we work in and out of this. And every time I hear of unlimited design services, first of all, everything is limited. You have to have profit margin.
I don't like that either. That's one of the things I hate about it, is they try to kind of lure you in with unlimited, even though like, okay, but really you can only work on one thing at a time. So that's actually why we decided to stay away from that wording. It's because it's just not true. So we're just an ad creative service. We're not saying we're unlimited or anything like that. Like there's definitely limits to what you can get within the time period. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the unlimited, but then the other thing too is a lot of the quality is like if you don't obsess. I've just learned just from people in general and hiring team members, the people that you bring on your team, which literally, I mean, outsourcing your ads is like outsourcing to someone who might be, they're a degree your team, right? Even if it's only for a couple hours a month. And if they don't obsess over their skill, like you have ad school. In ad school, you guys are constantly researching ads. You're posting ads in there. You're getting feedback on ads you've done. You're getting feedback. Everyone's getting feedback on stuff. You're providing feedback. So like what I love is you guys obsess over the ads. And so that's how I know that Get Ads is better than others, because like you said, you focus in on that. And you can't be the best landing page, sales page, email, ad, graphic. Like you can't be the best designer of everything. So, and you're right, ads, understanding the consumer behavior and the psychology around what's a good ad is different than, can you design good graphics? It goes beyond, deeper than that. So I love that. So let's I'm curious from an ad standpoint, copy and creative, two huge impactors on conversion rate. From a creative standpoint, like what kind of creatives are you seeing work really well right now in your agency and even in the ad school community?
So some of the things that we've seen really, really outperform anything else that we've tested is usually especially now, right? Because, and I want to say this is probably after the new Facebook interface came out, which I think it's been a while now. But ever since that happened, right, people had the option to go dark mode or light mode. And if you look at statistics, I don't quote me on this, but I believe over 70% of people actually prefer dark mode. And you'll see a lot of black ads on Facebook if you go through the feed, and they're just not going to stand out, right? So I think one of the most important things to note is that you have to make sure that your ad creative is friendly with either or of the themes that you go with. If you go with a light theme or if you go with the dark theme, like your ad should still stand out. So we typically try to stay away from anything that is just plain white or not plain white, obviously, but just has a lot of white on it, or anything that has a lot of dark in it, because it's going to blend in either of those screens, right? So anything that stands out. So very highly contrasting colors. We've been, whenever we can, right? So obviously we have clients for our agency and we have to follow design guidelines, but if we can get away with just putting really bright colors in front of people's screens, I think it makes a lot of sense because it's going to stand out in front of everything. The other thing that we've seen perform really well is, for example, we've been using a lot of carousels, and for some reason, and I don't know if this is your experience as well, but I'd love to hear, we've typically seen that carousels tend to perform more for retargeting ads, where you can kind of tell a story in that way and not for a prospecting type of campaign. And then video ads, we've seen anywhere from 30 seconds to 1 minute videos perform really well on the prospecting top of the funnel side of things. And for retargeting, we usually try to keep things shorter, and we actually try to avoid retargeting for videos for retargeting, because they take away from that call to action, right? Sometimes people get distracted, they're spending time watching the video, and by the time they're done with the video, they have something else going on. So for retargeting ads, we typically try to keep those ads very relatively short, right? So anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds max. And then if you can get away with images for retargeting, I think it's better because you just get them really quickly and they'll do what you want them to do essentially.
It's funny. That's a great perspective. I haven't thought about the light and the dark themes in Facebook, and you're right. So it's really high percentage of people that use dark mode, and I forget what the number is, but you're right. It's like 70% or 77%. It's a high amount.
I know it's definitely a majority of the people that are using dark mode for sure.
Yeah, it's fun. I haven't even thought about that. Dylan and I, we just filmed an ad last week. We've been getting into higher production ads and really we're testing right now. We're on this kick of testing high production value ads versus lower production ads. And in the e-com world, I view a low production ad as literally just using your product photography. To me, that's the bare minimum. And so investing more in our ads, and I never even crossed my mind to think, most people are using dark mode. Maybe we don't want to focus as much on dark colors if we don't have to. If it's just one of the videos we filmed was really, really dark feely because that's the vibe we wanted to feel depressing. And so that would make sense. But if we didn't have to, that video I posted in the group the other day, it was just a satire, but I wanted it to feel depressing. But that's something I don't even think about. Light versus dark mode on the screen. That's really great. So bright colors are the other thing that you're recommending then.
Yeah, bright colors, a lot of animations, right? So I think it also it's worth noting, what type of business you're talking about for direct consumer, or if it's B2B, or if it's any other type of service business. I think it depends what kind of approach you go with. But since a lot of people in your audience are more of the e-com side of things, I'm thinking a lot of direct to consumer, maybe drop shippers. There's a lot of really, really good ad creative out there. And for anybody that's not aware, we also have a newsletter where we break down ads pretty much on a weekly basis. We have a ton of ads that we break down every single day for that newsletter. And we go into pretty good depth on each one of those ads that we break down. But you'll see a lot of what's trending. And for anybody that's listening or watching to this podcast, right, check out things like Magic Spoon. I think they're doing an amazing job with their creative. If you take a look at their videos or their GIF ads that they run as well, you'll see a lot of the things that I think are performing really, really well. So it's really bright colors. Granted, that is their entire brand, right? So if you go to Magic Spoon and you look at their website, it's just very bright, very happy colors, but they work, right? And we've tested with multiple brands that don't necessarily follow that type of style guideline, but they just tend to perform better. So I would say if you're looking to really, test something new that you haven't done before, and if you're stuck on, just using very just neutral colors, try really upping the vibrancy of those ad creatives, and I'm almost willing to bet that they're going to outperform whatever you're running right now. So Magic Spoon, there's a bunch of others I can't think of off the top of my head, but
I'll add another one in there.
That newsletter.
I'll add one in there called Yumi. It's actually it's a baby food at Yumi. Huge fan of them. So we follow their ad library for inspiration for certain things. Magic Spoon is great. They have those colors. Yumi has those colors. Dylan, take note because we're doing an animated video test that he's animating next week. We're going to test bright colors, and I want to see the numbers on this. No, that's good.
The other one that I would say perform really well too is anything that's just funny, right? And this goes to talk about your video that you recently shared in the group as well. And I remember I mentioned that line that just got me. It's just funny, and I think people are going to engage with it. And the really cool part about putting something funny out there is that people are going to share it, right? So whether or not it performs on the ad side of things, if you're targeting the right people, if people start sharing that stuff, they're going to be likely connected with other people in the same space. They're going to see your ad. You just get free impressions, free reach, which is going to lead to a lot more conversions, ideally, right, that you would originally have gotten. But to go back to your comment about the video as well, for the theme, side of things, whether it's light or dark, I don't think it's super concerning whether you're using those bright colors or not on the actual video. I think as long as you have a thumbnail that stands out and just for example, just choose the brightest, scene or just the brightest scene in the video or something that really contrasts for your thumbnail. I think you should be good because the video is going to be moving anyway. So they'll notice that once it starts playing.
So serious. So like serious versus funny ads. And when I say serious, I mean like just ads that talk about maybe the benefits or the features, or the ads that just talk about the product versus like comedic ads. Like what would you say you see perform better on the conversion side?
It depends.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to say. It's definitely going to depend on your brand, on your product, on what you're trying to sell, and most importantly, who you're trying to sell to, right? I think the most important thing here is really to understand your audience. Like, who are you selling to? If you're selling to moms, like, do you really want to be like super funny unless it's something that's relevant to them? So there's always, that context that you have to keep in mind. But I would say in a broad spectrum, right? I think that funny is always going to outperform because it just gets noticed more. People are going to, like, going back to the same thing, right? People are going to share it. You're going to get free reach. Facebook, because on funny things, like, you're going to get reaction. So I think funny and controversial are pretty much similar in the sense that Facebook is just going to pick that up and it's going to reward you because people are going to be just more engaged with it, whether it's controversial or whether it's actually funny.
So yeah, and you're making complete sense. Like if you're targeting moms or you have a product that's really like serious and there's no way to really be funny about it, you're right. Funny probably won't do super well. I think that's going to vary.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'll give you an example. So when we first launched Get Ads, we were actually running with meme ads, and they were getting a ton of likes, a ton of shares, a lot of really cool vanity metrics, I guess you could say, and we were getting leads, but because we were essentially talking down on designers. In their minds, it looked like we were talking down on designers, right? They were expensive, they got things done slowly, all this and all that, and we were getting people that were commenting on the ads just pissed off because they were saying that because of companies like you, designers are going to go out of business, even though we're hiring designers pretty often. So it's just like, you just have to know who you're talking to and who's going to be looking at your ads as well.
So like what are the elements of like a really solid ad? Like when you go to create an ad, before we do that, like how many creatives do you go in with when you're creating an ad? Like if you're going to launch a new campaign, do you go in with one creative? Do you build like 50 creative? Like how many do you start with when you're first getting into a campaign?
It depends how much we're planning to spend, really.
Okay.
But if we're like, I would say in general for ourselves, we're typically running 3 different images to start off because we want to just learn really, really quickly what's going to outperform, right? And at the end of the day, Facebook typically goes down to about 3 winning images out of whatever you end up putting into it. And there's like, they'll choose one and that's the one that's going to be running is, 90% of the time. So we go with 3 images and we'll do like just 3 different angles. We try to keep the copy the exact same. So depending on what we're testing, right? If we're testing creative, we'll keep every element the same except for the actual image itself or the video. And then we'll see what performs better. Once we find that, we try to come up with a couple of new variations on that and then just keep testing that way to find new winners. If we're testing on and this is per ad set too. If we're testing on bigger accounts with just larger budgets, we're running anywhere from, I think the max we've done in one ad set is going to be 15 ads, but we're turning off ads relatively quickly, right? So maybe after a couple of days, we'll see, okay, like these are for sure the ones that have, been getting the most click through, the most conversion. So we'll turn the rest off and we'll typically just leave 3 live.
What would a budget be that would warrant that many ads?
We're looking at like over 1,000 a day.
Okay. Yeah. A lot more creative push in one ad set. 15. I don't even know if I've done that many ads in an ad set. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, we don't do it often. Like I said, like we typically leave that for like just really big spending accounts. Aside from that, we're looking at like 3, probably 5 ads max per ad set. And then we'll cut it back down to 3 running at the same time, and then we'll start to tweak things out between those three winners.
And so like how different are those creatives that you launch with? Because some people, and I ask this because what I see some people do is they will start with like one ad, right? And then they change the background color, and then that's ad number 2, and then they change the headline, and then that's ad 3. Or they just have 3 different background colors in the same shot. So like how unique are each of those creatives?
It depends on what we're testing. So like we'll get into phases of like, okay, let's test different colors. Let's test different copy in the actual images. Let's test a different call to action. But typically, like we'll want to run 3 very, very different ad creatives that usually talk about 3 different pain points. So we'll have, or it could be pain points. It could be the 3 different unique selling propositions that we have, just 3 different elements that are completely detached from one another, to really understand, okay, is it time savings that's making the difference here? Is it a budget thing? Or is it, just communication or wanting to integrate with our team and stuff like that? So we'll test 3 completely different angles and then go from there. And then we'll actually start to, like, as we start to test more and more, I feel like the changes do end up getting less, just less detailed and more just about the actual like design elements of the creative, right? So like we'll start with very different angles, and then we'll start to slowly just get into, okay, like this is doing really good. Let's just test a new color. Let's just test, throwing a different emoji on this ad to see if that increases engagement or anything like that.
So you'll start to once you might start with more unique, but then once one or some of them are taking off, then you'll start to refine those ones, just really optimize those ones in particular. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, hey, before we continue, because I want to dive into elements of good ads, maybe mistakes that people are making, things like that. I want to dive more into that. Before we do, for anybody who's listening, if you are not part of the Ecommerce Alley Facebook group, you have to go join it. It's absolutely free. Go to alleypodcast.com/group and it'll just direct you to the page. It's a lot easier than spitting off Facebook's entire URL. So go to alleypodcast.com/group. It'll take you there every single week. We're going live. We're doing workshops every single week at 11 a.m. on Wednesdays. And we have tons of resources, like 20 hours plus of additional training content. So if you're finding value in this, actually Lewis is about to join us on an upcoming workshop. And if you want to be part of that and you want to have access to all of those and an amazing community, go to alleypodcast.com/group and join. You will be glad that you did. All right, so you start with 3 to 5, it sounds like, and then you start to kind of narrow down a little bit, and then you start to even refine further. And so like, if you're creating an ad, like what are some key things that you recommend people include in their ads? Because I also know that at one point you couldn't have 20% text, it had to be less, and now you can have more. So like, is there a blend, or like where do you start when you're creating an ad? Like what are those elements that you want to put in there?
So I think like if we're talking about the ad that just does it all, right? I would say like
the one-shot wonder.
I think the text I think the actual copy on the ad has to be relatively brief, but super detailed in the fact that like, and I really like ads that actually use like bullet points in them, right? So you'll have your headline and then you have like 3-5 bullet points that just talk about literally everything that they're going to be getting, right? So it could be like, let's say you're talking about Magic Spoon, for example, since we already used them early, right? It's going to be healthy cereal, and then you're going to add your 3 bullet points, which are going to be like keto friendly, and it's sugar free, and 4 net carbs per serving, or whatever the case may be. But just like the things that are 100% going to talk to the consumer that you're trying to go after, right? So you'll have those. You'll have really powerful imagery. Maybe it's a GIF, or maybe it's just a static image. We've run tests before of ads that have, and you'll see this, right? Like a lot of people put buttons in the ads, even though you don't actually need a button. A lot of people will just not put a button. We've run tests before, and every single time the ads with the button just get more clicks. So we always like to add a button into the ad itself. And I would say the last element that's just going to make any ad just much more powerful is going to be some sort of cue, if you will, that is going to tell people that other people actually trust in this product as well, right? So you'll see people throw like 5 stars because it means that it's a 5-star reviewed product or something like that. Or if you're using something like Trustpilot, they'll throw the Trustpilot badge on there with the stars. Maybe you can actually throw a review on there. But again, keeping in mind, right, that the ad creative that's actually going to launch, I guess it depends on what placement you're going to be using. But let's talk about the feed for this sake, right? It's good to keep in mind that you also have all those different elements from the ad available, right? So you have your main ad text, and then you have your headline, your description. So I think if you're able to throw some sort of social proof in there, you should be good to go.
And when you're creating ads, like from a video standpoint, like do you ever like make a slideshow and see that do well with the different ads? Because you've mentioned video. I'm curious, like from even a video standpoint, like what kind of elements would be in a video, and would it be like an image slideshow video, or would it be like a complete animated video? Because I've seen you do some pretty amazing animated videos. So like what kind of elements would be in a video then, or would it be similar?
I would say it's the similar elements, right? So it's the same things that are going to sell, whether you put it on a static image or whether you put it on a video. It's just the sequence of how you roll those out. And I think that's another aspect that could be tested as well, right? Do you want to start off the video with a social proof, or do you want to start your video with some sort of, unique selling proposition? So it all depends, and I think it's worth testing. But I would say if we're talking purely on what elements are going to make that a good ad creative, I would say it's relatively the same. It's just a different format. So how you want to deliver it is the only thing that's changing. But keeping in mind, right, with the video, you have time that you now have to take into consideration and say, okay, if this is going to be a 15-second video, when do we want to tell them the price? Or when do we want to tell them, when do we want to show the CTA? And it's hard without really testing it. So I would say run a test and really understand, like what's the optimal time to actually drop that price into the video or the CTA or the social proof, and see which one performs better.
So when you create, do you start with, you mentioned you start with like 3 to 5 images. Do you start with images and then once you approve a concept, shift to creating video ads, or do you ever go right out of the gates with video and images?
We actually do always go with images first, because that, like you said, it helps us prove the concept. And then once we have an image that is performing well, we'll say, okay, these elements worked out really well. Let's see how we can put it into a video. Otherwise, and the main reason is just efficiency, right? If you're putting together a video without necessarily realizing whether or not the things that you're putting in it are going to work, then you're kind of at a disadvantage in the way that you've already worked. And videos aren't easy to make, right? And this, and especially if you're doing like professional production type stuff, it takes a lot of time and effort. So I would say test those things out first, right? And it could be testing things on long form ad copy. Like maybe the long form ad copy can be how you test that script that you're going to be using in the video, right? So I would say start with static and use everything that you plan on using for that video. And then once you have that and you say, okay, this works, let's throw some money into it and actually get that video done.
I think that's really, really good for anybody listening to really pay attention to, because with ads, I think that you need to get proof of concept of something working or not working really quick before you go invest a high amount of resource into something else. So like there are two things we always talk about. We have resource and we have impact. And our goal is always to achieve the most impact for the least resource. And video is like a pretty high resource. And depending on what you do, it's a medium to high resource. Yeah. And if you don't know the impact of it, you could go invest, like you just said, a lot of time in a video and you don't know if it's going to work. So I think that's a wonderful sequence that you need to test images and test the copy. Once that resonates, then you can take that copy or those angles and start to convert those into videos to then take it from a different creative type. I think that's really important to pay attention to, because so many people just want to go out with videos because they hear video ads are good, but if their angle and their message sucks, well, it's a high resource investment for nothing.
Granted, you could still get away with coming up with creating some, just quick videos. Like there's tools out there like Canva. You can create videos on Canva now. You can create videos on your phone. It all depends on what type of video you're creating, right? If you're planning on putting some like professional produced type video, I would say like test the elements that you're trying to use first and make sure that they work. If you're going to put together something on TikTok and use a very personal approach, right, it's going to take you, 15 seconds or something like that to kind of put that together. So it all depends on what route you decide to go with. But I would say before spending a pretty penny, I would say make sure those things are working, especially if you're not a big player like Josh here.
I don't know about that. I mean, Dylan's the big leagues. I will admit that, but I'm not that big of a player. Why don't we shift to so what do you think do you see people doing ads or like maybe mistakes because I know that most people, a lot of people they don't like hire out right away. Everyone starts on their own, right? Everybody opens up a Canva account, right, and then they go through the Canva templates, and then what they don't realize is they launch ads, and then suddenly their ads look like literally everybody else's because they're so stock. But like, what are those big like cringe-worthy mistakes that you see people make that people should be trying to avoid?
I would say I think there's a lot of mistakes that we all make. But I would say like one of the biggest things is, and you kind of mentioned it, and that's what made me think of it, is using stock images that are used a ton, right? And like people have seen those images in so many different ads, especially if you're trying to come up with especially if you're just launching your product and you're like super brand new and you're using the same individual that everybody has seen multiple times in their ads. I think it's just like I've seen this guy for every other product out there. So I would say like that's definitely a mistake. Like try to find really original like stock images that nobody's using or you don't see often. Otherwise, people are going to recognize them. The other thing I think is not going after what you've seen work already. And I think this is super easy, right? Like if you think through and wonder because I feel like almost everybody has made a purchase from a Facebook ad or any other type of ad. I would say go and think of the last ad that you actually purchased from and see why you purchased from it. Like, why did that make you buy? Study it, learn from it, and try to implement that into your own ads. The other thing I would say, it's not having any sort of contrasting colors, right? Like that's what's going to get the people's attention. So make sure that your ad creative is always contrasting, even if it's still white or black and it doesn't play well with the themes that we were talking about earlier. I think things should still contrast. Right? Like if you have a button in it, it should pop out and be basically the first thing that I can see on your ad. A lot of times too, I've noticed that people, I don't know how they actually put things together, but it just seems like they didn't put a lot of effort into it. So I would say like make sure that your ads look legitimate, I would say, where it doesn't feel like very scammy. What's another thing? I think for the most part, it's just not using very good product photography, especially for e-commerce. I think the product mostly sells itself when you look at the image, right? And you need to make sure that you can portray that in a good way where like if you're a consumer, I want to see that product worn and I want to imagine how it's going to look on me, right? So I would try to put an image of a person actually using the shoes, whether or compared to just putting an image of the shoes on their own, because you can't really picture it that way.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I'm even curious to hear your thoughts on. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like when you're building them. Like we don't want to have stock in there that everybody has seen over and over and over again. We want to make sure we have the contrast. When it comes to sizing, though, what do you maybe see work best? Like, do you see the square? Do you see the 9x16? Like, what are you using and recommending from an ad size standpoint?
We're typically recommend the 1080 by 1080, so the 1:1 ratio. Okay. And so we typically go with that. We actually, to be honest, we don't test a lot of other type of sizes because we've seen that one perform so well. And honestly, like that's a mistake, right? Like you should be testing different things, especially if people aren't using them anymore. Like there's probably money to be made in that, in just the regular Facebook ad that they were like, I think it's a 1200 by 628 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
To like, I think it's good to be testing different placements, especially if you can make them work with that ad creative. Like, I feel like ad creative can sometimes be size specific, where you could fit something really, really nice in a story ad, in a story ad, whereas you couldn't get the same perspective on just a square. So I think it's good to keep those things in mind. But I would say, like, we're typically leaning over to the 1080 by 1080, and to be honest, the reason we did that is it's like Facebook's recommended place or spec, right? So if my train of thought is, if Facebook's recommending it, it's because that's what they prefer. And if that's what they prefer, that's what they're going to reward on the actual platform side of things. So they're going to be showing those ads more. They're going to be essentially dropping CPMs for them, maybe, I don't know. But that's like, if you see that Facebook's rolling something out new and you have access to it, I would say try it out.
Yeah, we see. You're right. Like we've kind of defaulted at this point for us and our clients, like 1080 by 1080, just square 1-to-1, because we've seen it work for so long. And I just ran another test last week, and I had it as a dynamic creative ad, and I was running it as 9 by 16, 1-by-1. We did it to all the specifications, and every time we do it, 1080 by 1080, it's just the 1-to-1 ratio beats everything. You're right. We should always be testing, but once you do find something that works, it's kind of hard to like want to deviate, but you should every now and again, every 3 months, 6 months, go back and start to test those. But you're right. So we see the same things. Square, it works very well.
The other thing to keep in mind too, the other thing to keep in mind too is that, like you said, like everybody gets started somewhere. And if you have limited resources, limited time, and you're not like the best at resizing things and like just putting out creative, I would say stick to the 1080 by 1080, because for one, it's the Facebook's preferred spec size. And second, I feel like it plays nice with every other placement, right? Like, you can run it on story ads, you can run it on Instagram feed, and it looks fine. You can run it on a Facebook feed, and all the other placements that they have. I think that's something to keep in mind as well. As like, if you don't have the capacity to be creating ads for all the different placements that they offer, I would say just run with the 1080 by 1080 and then use that one.
Yeah. I love that, man. I love it. So kind of to close up here, I'm curious from you, like, what is, if you can leave everybody with one big piece of advice when it comes to creatives and their ads, like, what would that piece of advice be?
That's a great question. I think a lot of times we second guess ourselves with something that, we believe is not going to work. Like, we'll have an idea and we'll just drop it because we say that this is not going to work. I think that the best thing you could do is just test it. And I've actually been reading a cool book lately called Thinking in Bets, which I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's by she's a psychologist, but she's also a poker player. And by thinking in bets, you're able to think more objectively instead of essentially just holding on to your own biases and confirmatory thought, right? And that's what you want to try to stay away from, because if everyone around you is just confirming what you've already learned, like, you're not going to get anywhere new. But if people are challenging, and if you're challenging your own thoughts at the same time, like, you have to be learning from everything. So I would say, like, think of the craziest idea for an ad creative and run with that. Think of something that's just like super outside of the box. Like, and if you look at those brands that we were talking about earlier, like a Magic Spoon, I think you said it was Yumi. There's a bunch like those. If you guys look at, they were previously called Nugs, and you may have heard of them before, Josh. Now I think they're called Stimulate. They're like vegan chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
Their ad creative was crazy, and I loved it. If you guys take a look at some of those companies, like, you'll see what I mean by thinking outside the box, and just come up with some crazy like concepts and stuff like that. And usually those are like the things that really perform well, because they just grab people's attention so well.
I couldn't agree more. And the interesting thing is, like, oftentimes too, I need to read that book. I've heard of the book. I'm thinking in bets, like I've never read it. But I love it because it aligns with what I believe. Like you have to, I tell everyone, marketing is a mathematical equation, not an emotional decision. And so you need to let the math speak for itself, not your gut. Everyone says, oh, trust your gut. In marketing and advertising, it's not like that. You have to trust the math. You have to remove yourself.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is so often what we think is going to or not going to work goes the opposite direction. Like there's so many campaigns I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. I scripted this well. We put so much time into designing this, and then it just bombs. And then there are other times where like we're in an episode and Dylan just takes a behind the scenes random photo of me while I'm like doing a podcast episode, and I don't do anything to it, and I just upload that as an image for one of our lead campaigns, and it performs like gangbusters. I'm like, this whole time, and it took 3 seconds, and that's our best performing creative. So you're saying you need to get your reps in, and you need to just ship it essentially, and kind of remove that bias.
Yeah, pretty much. I think the worst mistake like people can do is just sticking to what they're doing and just running with that without any changes. So like test something completely different. If you're doing really bright ads, your audience is probably used to it, right? And this is contrary to what I just said earlier. But if you're always running bright ads, run a really dark ad with something that contrasts. And I feel like your audience is not going to be used to it. So they'll actually react to it instead of anything that you've been running that's bright, right? And to go back to your point about, like advertising and marketing just being a mathematical equation, I totally agree. And that's why I think, just removing yourself from that equation, right? Because just as a human, you have a ton of different beliefs and emotions and things that you're essentially putting into your campaigns without realizing it, and realizing that other people have totally different beliefs to what you have. They have very different life experiences, to where like whatever you may be thinking doesn't even apply to them. And the only way to really find out is to run that and run the test and see what the metrics say.
Yeah, that's great. I couldn't agree more. What I'm going to say is that for anybody listening, Louis, you also have with getads.co. Can you break down what that is and how that kind of works for anybody listening right now? Because I think it's a fantastic service, but I think you'll describe it way better than myself.
Yeah, so GetAds is a graphic design service. It's a graphic and video ad design service for literally any type of business, right? So we work with direct consumer companies. We've had dropshippers sign up before, B2B companies, SaaS companies, and it's basically, I think, and I hate to kind of describe it this way, but I think the best way to describe it, because it's what people are most used to, it's kind of like one of those unlimited design service, but we're purely focused on the ad creative side of things, right? Mm-hmm. So video ads, static image ads, display banner ads, and all those different things. It's a monthly service, so you can sign up. We have 3 different tiers. We have basic, pro, and agency, and they have different limitations. Basically, the only limits that exist is how many requests you can put in a month. And you can go to the website getads.co to check that out. We also have a newsletter where we review and break down ads on a weekly basis. So you'll get a really clean email every week with different ads that our team reviews every single week. And we're rolling this out soon. It's not public yet, but we have ad sheets, which is just a repository of a bunch of different companies with their ad library, their sector, their vertical in there as well, where you can just click through the ad library to save you time. And we're going to be doing that for direct consumer and for B2B and for SaaS. And if there's any other business models or just different types of businesses that we come up with that I feel like would need a separate sheet, we'll do that. But for now, I think it's going to be rolling out those 3 pretty soon.
I did see you launching that. That's brilliant, because everybody needs, in my opinion, needs to use the ads library to see inspiration, see what other competitors and other big dogs that have spent many more millions than them are doing. And I think that's wonderful. So if you guys go to alleypodcast.com/Louis, LUIS, we're going to direct it to his website. Go check it out. At the very, very least, I think everybody needs to subscribe to the Ad School newsletter and community on Facebook, because $4.99 a month. I mean, you should charge 10 times that amount, in my opinion. It's worth at least 10 times minimum that. But guys, it's $4.99 at the time of this recording. It might be higher when you go look at it. Go check that out because it's going to give you inspiration for your ads. In like, I've seen ads in the community that I've taken and I've used within our ad campaigns and our team has used, because it just gives you the inspiration that you need to really launch those campaigns. Because so often, like, you get in front of Canva or Photoshop or whatever, and you'll just get kind of stuck. So that's an incredible option.
You just don't even know where to go.
Yeah. And so I've learned that the best place to go is start with inspiration, and then you kind of build off. Like, I'll find 3 to 5 pieces of inspiration before we start building campaigns with different types of creatives. So at the very least, everybody should go there, alleypodcast.com/Lewis. We'll direct them there. But Lewis, man, thank you. Thanks for hanging out on the podcast. I appreciate it. And for everybody listening, this is the E-Commerce Alley podcast, where we believe the great brands are built on passionate leadership, smart operations, and of course, powerful marketing. This has been produced by the legendary Dylan Counts. I am your host, Josh Coffey, and Lewis and I are grateful that you guys tuned in, you listened, you watched us talk about ads, because ads are such a crucial part of growing any business. You can go to alleypodcast.com to see the show notes as well as more information. And don't forget to go join the E-Commerce Alley Facebook group at alleypodcast.com/group. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon.